Prelude: The disappearance of the seahorses, in which a spreading poison comes to the old reef and all the seahorses mysteriously vanish. Act 1, Scene 1, The Seahorse Cafe, in which our heroine Pearl falls in love with Corporal Bert and the evil Groper pays an unwelcome visit to the Seahorse Cafe. The Seahorse Cafe was a place where fine young fish would meet to spend the evening dancing to the latest reef town beat. The rock was hard, the drinks were soft, the chairs were in between. In short, the Seahorse was the place in which one could be seen. The cafe came upon a knoll above the ebb and flow, unblemished by the poison that was taking hold below. The band was hot, the place was cool, the atmosphere just right, and all the fish would bop and hop and boogie through the night. The owner of the cafe was a fine, upstanding trout, who had a lovely daughter and a son who seemed a lout. She witnessed at the cafe and was cheered quick and bright, but he joined the catfish gang and stayed out late at night. Despite the shock of silky hair and earrings in his snout, young Phineas was really just your normal teenage trout. The catfish gang looked tough and mean, no manners, no respect, but deep inside they meant no harm and dressed up for effect. The daughter, we shall call her Pearl, would often stop and flirt with all the local soldier crabs until she noticed Bert. He looked the part, a clipped mustache, 2 eyes, 8 boots, 1 glove, and Pearl, who couldn't help herself, fell hopelessly in love. That fateful night when Pearl and Bert first fell for one another, and she gazed deep into his eyes, first one stalked, then the other. There came a crash, somebody screamed, and in the doorway stood the Groper and his henchfish. It was clear they meant no good. The Groper was an ugly fish with wicked piggy eyes, possessed of bloated appetites as witnessed by his size. His pinstripe suit was tailor-made, complete with matching tie, exactly what the well-dressed crook was wearing that July. A savage-looking swordfish stood a little to his right, that kind of thug you wouldn't want to come across at night. His sidekicks were a pair of sharks with dubious IQs who dressed in stovepipe trousers and wore pointy two-tone shoes. The Groper owned the place next door, a sleazy rundown bar, where low-life slugs and wintle traps made bootleg caviar. He'd bought a lot of property in last October's crash and ran the sort of business where clients paid in cash. The Groper said, "You punks take heed, this warning is for you. Stay out of this here cafe or your swimming days are through. I own the only bar in town that's gonna jump and jive. You come back here again and you ain't gonna stay alive." His bodyguards slicked back their hair and circled round the crowd as if to dare the customers to voice their thoughts aloud. Then, roughing up a sea snail who was less than half their height, the sharks rejoined their master and stepped out into the night. Scene 2, Down at the Wreck, in which the catfish gang came face to face with the Groper sharks. The soldier crabs arrive in the nick of time and Corporal Bert pins a note to his true love Pearl. The catfish gang were hanging out down by the local wreck, demolishing the rigging on the starboard upper deck. When Stan and Ted, the Groper sharks, perchance to happen by, the catfish leaped down from the ship and faced them eye to eye. Young Phineas was furious. He swam right up to Ted. "You sharks are nothing more than stupid villains," Finney said. "You think that you're big heroes roughing up defenseless snails? Well, let's see how you look with catfish claw marks down your tails." The sharks revealed their wicked teeth and grinned a wicked grin. It looked as though a fearsome fight was shortly to begin. But suddenly there came the sound of fast approaching feet. A company of soldier crabs came marching down the street. They rounded up the catfish and informed them of their rights, while Stan and Ted moved quickly away from all the lights. The area was cordoned off, all trouble spots were manned. The soldier crab commander had the crisis well in hand. "You catfish are a rotten lot," the crab commander said, his buggy eyes surveying them from well above his head. "I ought to have your whiskers, we can do without your kind. Now clear off every one of you before I change my mind." With calculated slowness and unpertinent remarks, the catfish gang retreated, looking round them for the sharks. But Stan and Ted had disappeared the moment things got hot, for villains they most surely were, but stupid they were not. When all the members of the gang had disappeared from view, the colonel said, "Attention, men, a message has come through. A creeping plague is killing off the coral, gray and dead. Our soldiers are to find the source from whence this poison spread." The army was to leave at once. All crabs were on alert, and at this news a little gasp escaped from Corporal Burt, for in his heart a crack appeared, a soulful lovesick pain, to think that he might never see his true love, Pearl, again. The colonel gave an order and the soldiers wheeled about, but as they left, Burt lagged behind, his mind a sea of doubt. He longed to see his darling Pearl before he went away, and tell her all these tender things that parting lovers say. Just then he heard a rustle in some bushes up ahead, and from a clump of seaweed poked a spiky mane that said, "Hey Bert, it's Finney! Over here! I'm hiding in the weed!" "Dear Phineas," cried Corporal Burt, "you're just the fish I need. The soldier crabs are leaving. In an hour we must depart. But will you take a note for me to ease my aching heart? Tell Pearl that I shall miss her every hour of every day." So Finney promised Bert he'd take the note without delay. The other catfish reappeared as Bert marched out of view and held a general meeting as to what the gang should do. "Those sharks are getting way too big. Let's cut them down to size." And so they formed a plan to catch their rivals by surprise. Scene 3. Back at the Seahorse Cafe, in which the unscrupulous groper acquires the Seahorse Cafe and Pearl gives Finney a message before embarking on a long journey into the unknown. Back at the Seahorse Cafe, there was tension in the air. The swordfish fins akimbo stood behind the groper's chair. The groper watched Pearl's father through a pall of acrid smoke that lent across the table down some caviar and spoke. "I'm a very patient fish, a fact of which I'm proud, along with every quality with which I am endowed. But patience as a virtue has its limits, you agree? I want this contract settled by the time I count to 3. He stood and thrust a pen toward his victim's tired fin. Pearl's father sighed and sighed. The poor old trout had given in. And so the groper came to be the legal licensee of Reeftown Seahorse Cafe for $1.93. The groper turned towards them as he headed for the street. "I trust you are aware of certain costs you'll have to meet. The taxes and the legal fees expenses underlined, you'll find them in the fine print of the contract you just signed." The sound of wicked laughter was still hanging in the room, an eerie echo adding to the general air of gloom, when through the door burst Phineas and handed Pearl the note, who paid no heed to grammar and disclosed what Bert had wrote. "My darling Pearl, I must away, for duty doth require. I sally forth to unknown parts and dangers dark and dire. But through all kinds of peril, naught shall cause me harm or hurt. As long as you still love me, sign your ever-loving Bert." "Oh, Phineas, what shall I do?" Poor Pearl began to weep. "For we must also leave tonight and face the ocean's deep." Then Pearl told brother Finney of the cafe's awful fate, another groper's diner full of sea slugs, eels, and bait. The dreadful news hit Finney like an anchor from above. To think that villain owned the place he had come to know and love. "I'll not be going with you, Pearl. I have a job to do. That thieving thug has bitten off far more than he can chew." With that he turned and made to go, but Pearl called out his name. "Dear Finney, what you did for Bert, please do for me the same. Take Bert this note that he may find the trail that I shall make, a secret path of seahorse signs to mark the road we take." As Finney left to join his gang and Pearl began to pack, a sea snail trotted past with his belongings on his back. Behind him came his wife and kids, who numbered 24, and as they passed, the sea snail's voice came wafting through the door. "This place we used to call our home has really gone to pot, and now, on top of all the rest, the reef's begun to rot. When sharks are free to terrorize a poor defenseless snail, I'd say the situation has gone well beyond the pale." Pearl watched the sea snail catch his breath behind the cafe lights and grumbled to himself about the lack of shellfish rights. Then called him, "We too must travel roads we do not know. Pray tell where you are headed, for we know not where to go." He told her of an ad he'd seen in last week's Seaweed Mail about a distant coral reef with building lots for sale. "Outstanding value, close to shops, all coral fresh and clean." It sounded like a bargain, so he had bought one sight unseen. The thought of healthy coral, flanked by seaweed lush and long, convinced Pearl and her father they should join the sea snail throng. So turning off the flashing lights and slamming shut the door, they boldly went where no saltwater trout had gone before. Scene 4, the Groper's Hideout, in which the catfish gang learn of the Groper's evil scheme to destroy the old reef, but their visit does not go according to plan. The Groper's secret hideout lay a little out of town, where stunted weeds grew sparse and drab and all the rocks were brown. From deep within a tangled pile of cars and rusty beams, the Groper ran his businesses and planned his fishy schemes. An old and toothless tiger was posted by the door, but from his creaking chair there came a steady wheezing snore. The lookout dreamt uneasy dreams, completely unawares, as 7 stealthy catfish crept across the wooden stairs. They peered in through the windows, keeping safely out of sight, and watched the scene within, lit by grimly yellow light. The room was lined with works of art and crates of stolen goods that left no doubt the Groper's gang were rotten Robin Hoods. The swordfish sat inscribing his initials on a chair, while Stan and Ted, the Groper's sharks, combed sump oil through their hair. 3 angelfish sang a cappella jazz beside the bar, as Grope Mud Groper sat and gulped his bootleg caviar. Then, rapping on a table with his jewel-encrusted cane, the Groper stood and made a speech, both arrogant and vain. This evening's celebration marks a most auspicious day, a victory for Groperdom in every wicked way. That beastly Seahorse Cafe will no longer jump and jive. I'm gonna turn the place into a seedy, rundown dive. No lights, no stage, no music, no more funky 3-piece band. The fish will stay away in droves, exactly as I planned. I bought the Seahorse Cafe just to watch the business fold. I plan to see an empty stage, the dance floor bare and cold. It's part of an ingenious plan, my shrewdest scheme to date, to make a massive fortune in the field of real estate. Some time ago I bought a reef and advertised it well, but what I really needed was some trick to help it sell. Then from above the poison came a strange and wondrous sight, 12 giant barrels tumbling through a dark and stormy night. They came to rest beside my reef, which soon began to die. It seemed to me a bitter blow dealt cruelly from on high. But then I put my mind to work and came up with a scam to turn my loss to profit. That's the kind of guy I am. I sent my boys to do a job, a very secret task, to share the burden round a bit. Is that too much to ask? And so it was the poison spread as if a tappet turned, which, as you know, is how poor Teddy's dorsal fin got burned. So now this reef is dying too. It's looking far from fit. The citizens of Reef Town know the time has come to split. They're looking around for somewhere new before it gets too late, and I've begun to sell my reef at twice the going rate. Of course, when selling property, one uses certain jargon to raise a bit of interest, making it sound like there's a bargain. Outstanding value, close the shop, these phrases grab attention, while minor things like poison somehow fail to get a mention. Some parts of it remain unsold, a coral bed or two. It's cut my profit down a bit, and that will never do. But all these fish who used to hang around that Seahorse died will soon be looking elsewhere for a brand new place to jive. And as for the poison, it is sure to stop one day, as soon as Ted goes back and turns the valve the other way. I'll wait until the coral beds regenerate, and then I'll sell the old reef back to them for twice as much again. The catfish, hearing every word, were filled with disbelief. This Groper was a good man more than just a petty thief. His crime was more than wicked, it was barbarous and mean, the most outrageous ripoff that the reef had ever seen. They leaked through open windows and they crashed through ones that weren't, to teach the sharks a lesson that would never be unlearned. The angelfish were terrified and darted here and there, while gutless Gropeman Groper cowered underneath his chair. The catfish gained the upper hand, but victory was brief. For though the sharks were beaten, there was still the swordfish chief. He made a lunge at Phineas and caught him by the nose and wouldn't let him go until the other catfish froze. The game was up, the battle lost, the raiders overthrown. Then Phineas saw his chance and made a break out of his own. He bit the swordfish on the fin, dropped smartly to the floor, dodged quickly past the startled sharks, and vanished through the door. Act 2, Scene 1, The Deep, in which Pearl and her companions journey through the ocean depths and outsmart a hungry Monterey eel. The sea snails, Pearl, and Mr. Trout were far away from home, in strange uncharted waters where no reef folk ever roam. Around them towered murky shapes of rocks and cliffs unseen, the grim, forbidding shadows of a deep and dark ravine. The little band of travelers pressed onward through the deep, past fearsome dark anemones and fish that never sleep, and as they journeyed bravely through this bleak and dismal vale, Pearl carved her little seahorse signs to mark the party's trail. They came across a fallen rock that blocked the path ahead and forced the group to take a less inviting route instead. Pearl stopped to leave a seahorse sign, but as she drew her knife, the rock that Pearl was resting on came suddenly to life. It reared up high above her head, a writhing snake-like figure that looked like some enormous slug except with teeth and bigger. Pearl dropped the knife and leaping back, she gave a little squeal, for rearing high above her was a great big Monterey eel. "My dear," he said in dulcet tones, "I really must protest. You very nearly ruined my expensive satin vest. And this one is my favorite, so elegant yet plain, I think I'll have to eat you so it won't occur again." He smiled at Pearl, a hungry gleam reflecting in his eye, but Pearl had kept her senses and she told a desperate lie. "How lovely!" she exclaimed out loud, "an eel has come to dine. My friend the killer whale will be along to chill the wine." "A killer whale?" the eel inquired. "My dear, I think you jest. A little fish who tell white lies are something I detest." But suddenly a roar rang out from somewhere up high that sounded very much as though a killer whale was nigh. The Monterey eel was most impressed and quickly changed his style, from ruthless deep-sea predator to service with a smile. "Perhaps I can assist you, ma'am. It seems you need a hand. I know these parts extremely well. Your wish is my command." That mighty roar was not, in fact, a bona fide whale, but just a quick impression by our friend, the little snail. He grabbed the giant trumpet shell and, given all he got, a trick that every sea snail knew, but eels it seemed did not. The Monterey eel was anxious now to take the whale as friend, for fear his life might soon come to a most unpleasant end. And so he told Pearl all about the valley and its traps, and how to find the secret ways through fissures, cracks, and gaps. He told her how a spreading plague had recently arrived and killed off all the seaweed very little had survived. It came from over yonder, and he pointed up above, along the very path her little group had planned to tread. If paradise is what you seek, your road lies to the west, where there you'll find a reef to more than satisfy your quest. This valley leads to nothing more than darkness and despair. Climb up across the mountains, for the land you seek lies there. Pearl thanked the eel and took her leave a bit with some care, and joined her hidden comrades and the whale that wasn't there. Then, taking heed of all they'd heard and what they hoped to find, they started on the long, slow climb and left the deep behind. Scene 2, The Source of the Poison, in which the soldier crabs reach the end of their search. Bert makes a shocking discovery and Phineas reveals the groper's treachery. That night, as Pearl began to climb the mountains of the deep, her true love Bert was woken from a restless, troubled sleep. He fancied that he'd heard a cry from drifting on the tide, and pulling on 4 pairs of boots, he took a look outside. The soldier crabs were camped upon a plain of withered stumps. Once splendid coral sculptures, now just sticky, oily lumps. For days the crabs had marched across this grime-polluted land, and Bert could tell the poison source was very close at hand. He peered into the murky gloom and listened for the sound, then fatally heard the cry again. His heart began to pound. It came from somewhere up ahead, not far from where he stood, so Bert went to investigate, as all good soldiers should. A rocky outcrop barred his way, demanding that he climb through sticky streams of oily gunk and gobs of horrid slime. He reached the crest and cried out with amazement and surprise, for nothing could have steeled him for the sight that met his eyes. A dozen massive canisters lay scattered on the ground, embedded in the blackened sand with debris all around, and from a drum they lay atop the huge, horrid heap. He watched a stream of reeking, oily liquid slowly seep. With horrid fascination, Bert absorbed the poison flow across the rocky landscape to the spreading plain below. A figure lay upon the rocks, a spilky yellow mane. "It's Phineas!" Bert's urgent cry rang out across the plain. He scrambled down into the slime and waded to his friend, who raised his head and pointed to the leaky barrel's end. A tap protruding from the drum spewed forth the evil brew, and using his enormous brain, Bert knew just what to do. He grabbed the tap and turned it off, but still the liquid flowed. The toxic waste had caused the rubber washers to corrode. Then in a feat of wondrous strength, Bert raised his mighty claw and squeezed the rusty faucet till the poison flowed no more. Bert's cry awoke the other crabs who scuttled up the hill and gathered round poor Finny, who was very gravely ill. In fits and gasps he told them of the groper's shocking crime and how he tried to turn the tap and stop the deadly slime. My catfish friends were captured by the groper's evil louts, but I escaped and haunted for the army's whereabouts. I came across the poison and I tried to turn it off. His tail of wool was halted by an awful racking cough. The soldier crab commander issued orders left and right. Take down the tents, make fast the guns, we head for home tonight. The enemy is elsewhere, though his crime is all around. Leave not a stone of rock unturned, this groper's must be found. Scene 3, the discovery of paradise, in which Pearl and her fellow travelers reach the end of their climb and make a wonderful discovery. For 40 long exhausting days and 40 sleepless nights, Pearl's little band climbed wearily to vast and giddy heights, where plankton swirled in drifting waves of phosphorescent snow. The sea snails plodded onwards through the strange, translucent glow. They came across a meadow ringed by weird, exotic trees, where giant clumps of seaweed swayed upon the ocean breeze. Whatever upward led the trail, they tarried but a day. Pearl carved her secret sign, and they continued on their way. Eventually came a day they climbed the final crest and gazed across the mighty plain that rolled to the west. They reached the furthest threshold of the continental shelf, and their weary eyes it looked like paradise itself. The ocean gleamed and sparkled in the early morning light, a grand dramatic backdrop to a truly stirring sight. For there beneath a gleaming veil of slanting golden rays, a coral reef of untold size lay glowing in the haze. And as they watched, it seemed to them the ocean rose and fell, with countless tiny jewels that danced and flickered in the swell. Pearl's eyes were filled with tears of joy. No further would they roam. A million swirling seahorses had come to guide them home. Scene 4, the end of the groper, in which the catfish were rescued, the groper is vanquished, and Finny remembers something of great importance. Behind the groper's hideout in a dark and smelly shed, the catfish gang lay bound and gagged, unhappy and unfed. A week had passed and still no sign that help was on its way. The gang's despondent mood increased with every passing day. Then suddenly there came a mighty blow upon the door, and through the splintered timbers crashed a massive orange claw. It smashed the door to smithereens, then disappeared from sight, and left the catfish speechless with astonishment and fright. The claw belonged to Combat Lobster 46903, the flagship of the soldier crab's crust ocean cavalry. The army had arrived at last, and leading the attack was long-lost comrade Phineas astride the lobster's back. The captive catfish clapped and cheered and danced in leaps and bounds, while seeing they were bound and gagged was harder than it sounds. But then as Finny freed his friends, they heard an angry shout. The groper's thugs had heard the noise and came to check it out. The sharks converged on 903, who raised his giant claw and furnished Stan an uppercut beneath his greasy jaw. The startled sharks turned tail and fled, the catfish giving chase, but found themselves surrounded, fin to fin and face to face. A cornered shark is dangerous, as any catfish knows, and Finny quickly realized the scene could come to blows. But just in time, the soldier crabs arrived to save the day. They apprehended Stan and Ted and marched them both away. The shark's arrest was carried out according to the book, a routine operation how to bag a petty crook. But capturing the swordfish and his evil groper boss was proving somewhat harder, and the crabs were at a loss. "Come out and keep your fins held high," the crabber commander cried. "We've got the place surrounded, and I know that you're inside." But silence greeted every word the colonel had to say. Could Gropeman and his right-hand fish have somehow got away? Then with a roar, the swordfish burst upon the startled crabs and fiercely waved his sword about with wicked leaps and jabs. He lunged towards the colonel, dragged him roughly off his steed, then bit him on the angle, which was very fierce indeed. But Finny grabbed a lobster pot and rode unto the fray, and holding above his head he shouted, "Bombs away!" He trapped the swordfish sword and all from snout to thrashing tail, a neatly packaged villain in a private one-fish jail. The groper watched the sailfish fall and knew his race was run, then quoth out loud his golden rule, "Look out for number one." He grabbed a sack of unmarked pearls and quickly slipped outside, but waiting there was Corporal Burt. "You're nicked," the corporal cried. He grabbed the squirming groper in his strong crustacean claws and carried him aloft amidst tumultuous applause. And so the mighty groper fell, a sorry sight indeed, bereft of any dignity, a victim of his greed. The groper's reign had ended, but his legacy remained. They gazed across a barren land, a seascape cracked and stained. The army had prevailed and brought the villains to be tried, but where were they to go now that the coral reef had died? Then Finney gave a sudden cry of Pearl's parting note to Bert. He'd totally forgotten it tucked deep beneath his shirt. He drew it out, all stained and torn, but more or less complete, and handed to Bert, who read the precious, crumpled sheet. "My darling Bert, I write this with sad and heavy heart, for long and hard will be the days that we must be apart. For every turn my journey takes, a sign will mark the way, for you find and follow till we meet again one day." And so it was that learnt about the trail Pearl left behind, and followed in her footsteps, knowing not what they would find. In time they reached the promised land and soon forgot their pain, but nothing ever grew upon their cruel coral reef again. Epilogue: The New Seahorse Cafe, in which the new Seahorse Cafe is open and we learn the fate of the groper and his partners in crime. The captain was a splendid sight, a white glove and crimson vest, a shiny golden medal gleaming brightly on his chest. The medal read for courage, and he glanced at it with pride, then squared his jaw, breathed deeply, checked his tie, and stepped inside. The captain was a sea fish all dressed up to the nines, with teeny massive fins and flippers, earrings, spikes, and spines. As Bert stood gazing round the room, Pearl winked at him and smiled, and served another customer a mug of Mulset mild. Then Phineas called out his name. "Come sit with us, my friend, and let us toast the hero of the groper's dismal end." The catfish gang all stood and clapped, and Captain Burke went red. "I only did my duty," the embarrassed soldier said. Young Finney had a medal too, a purple heart and rose, that hung in pride of place about his bruised and bandaged nose. In grateful recognition of a brave and wounded trout, the glorious inscription dangled proudly from his snout. The brand new Seahorse Cafe had been open just a week, but in that time the patronage had reached an all-time peak. The techno-laser dance floor was awash with stomping feet as Kevin and the Kippers played their famous Reeftown beat. A backing group of angelfish accompanied the band with perfect three-part harmonies, the finest in the land. Since parting from the groper, they had polished up their act, and now they filled the dance floor with the crowds they could attract. The groper sharks were still around, a little short of friends, but to their credit, both of them had tried to make amends. They worked the late-night roster, doing small domestic chores, collecting dirty glasses, washing walls, and scrubbing floors. Their former chief, the swordfish, had a blossoming career. They utilized his swordsmanship, in which he had no peer. He peeled a mean potato, over 80 bags a week, the fruit of hours of practice and a fabulous technique. And as for the groper, undisputed king of crime, he groveled at the kitchen sink, his flippers in the grime. Beneath a pile of filthy plates, at last he understood that greed brought only ruin, and the tide had turned for good. The end.